quiero anunciar que hemos decidido impulsar una ley de amnistía general que cubra todo el periodo político de violencia política de 1999 al presente.
On the evening of January 30th, Delcy Rodríguez stood in front of cameras in Caracas and did something no one saw coming. She announced an amnesty law covering 27 years of political violence. She announced the closure of El Helicoide, the building that symbolizes torture, disappearances, and fear. She talked about national reconciliation, but she wasn't speaking to the Venezuelan people. She was responding to Donald Trump. 3 weeks earlier, Trump authorized the capture of Nicolás Maduro on foreign soil. Rubio delivered the ultimatum: real reforms, total liberation, or the regime falls on its own. And now, the woman who inherited control of Chavismo was making concessions Maduro never made. This wasn't an internal decision. This was capitulation. The question isn't whether Trump won this round. The question is, will he accept this as victory, or will he tighten the grip? And what is Delcy hiding before he finds out? Because if this amnesty is theater, Trump already has the next move planned. Here's how power works in Washington right now. Trump doesn't negotiate through diplomats anymore. He uses military ops, financial pressure, and public ultimatums. And when someone like Rubio delivers the message, it's not a suggestion. It's the last warning before consequences. If you want to understand how Trump is reshaping US foreign policy in real time, and what happens when regimes try to call his bluff, hit that subscribe button, because this story is far from over. On January 3rd, US forces captured Nicolás Maduro during a covert operation. The details are still classified, but the outcome was immediate. The most powerful man in Venezuela was gone. And Delcy Rodríguez, Maduro's vice president, his enforcer, his heir, was suddenly in charge of a regime under siege. She had two options: double down and face total collapse, or bend. She bent. But here's the problem. What she announced on January 30th sounds historic, but it's also vague. And in Caracas, vague announcements have always been a stalling tactic. Let's break it down. The amnesty law she's proposing covers the period from 1999 to today. That's the entire Chavez era, the entire Maduro era. 27 years of political arrests, show trials, and disappeared activists. According to Foro Penal, a human rights organization that tracks political prisoners, there are still 711 people behind bars for political reasons as of late January. Delcy says the government has already released more than 600, but human rights groups can only confirm around 300. The rest? No names, no documentation, no transparency. So the question is simple: where's the list? And here's where it gets worse. The amnesty law comes with exceptions. It excludes people accused of murder, serious human rights violations, and drug trafficking. That sounds reasonable, until you realize the regime has spent decades labeling opposition leaders as terrorists, conspirators, and traffickers. If those labels stick, the amnesty means nothing. So who decides what counts as a serious human rights violation? The same judges who sentenced dissidents in the first place? The same prosecutors who built careers destroying political opponents? That's not reform, that's rebranding. Then there's El Helicoide. Delcy announced it's being shut down and converted into a social, sports, and cultural center. That's a massive symbolic move. El Helicoide isn't just a prison. It's the headquarters of SEBIN, Venezuela's intelligence service. It's where dissidents are interrogated. It's where torture has been documented by international observers. It's where people disappear. For decades, that building has been the physical embodiment of fear in Venezuela. Closing it sends a message. But to who? Because here's what Delcy didn't say. She didn't say SEBIN is being dissolved. She didn't say the personnel are being investigated. She didn't say there will be independent oversight of intelligence operations going forward. She said the building is closing. So if SEBIN just relocates to another facility, with the same leadership, the same interrogators, the same methods, what actually changed? The address? That's the test. And it's a test Trump is watching closely. This is where Trump's calculation matters. He didn't just remove Maduro to watch Chavismo rebrand itself. He removed Maduro to force structural change. And that means the pressure doesn't stop with an announcement. Rubio isn't just Secretary of State, he's the architect of Trump's Venezuela strategy. And here's what that role actually does. It builds coalitions with regional allies, coordinates sanctions and financial pressure, and aligns diplomatic moves with intelligence operations. When Rubio speaks publicly about Venezuela, he's not making predictions. He's signaling what the US is already prepared to do. And that kind of institutional weight gives someone like Delcy a very short window to deliver real results before the next round of consequences hits. Rubio has made it clear. The US wants to see transparent elections, international observers, and a timeline. Not promises, proof. And Delcy hasn't provided that yet. So what's she actually trying to avoid? One possibility, she's buying time. She makes the announcement, releases some prisoners, shuts down the most visible symbol of repression, and hopes Trump declares victory and moves on. Another possibility, she's genuinely trying to navigate a transition, but she's surrounded by hardliners in the military and intelligence apparatus who won't let her go too far. Either way, she's operating under constraints Trump created, but there's a third scenario, and it's the one that should make people nervous. What if this is all preparation for something bigger? Venezuela's economy is in ruins. The oil sector, the only real source of revenue, has been gutted by mismanagement and sanctions. Delcy also announced reforms to the hydrocarbons law, opening the door for private investment and foreign capital. That's a seismic shift. For decades, Chavismo built its entire identity on state control of oil. Now they're inviting capitalism back in. That doesn't happen unless the alternative is total collapse, or unless someone in Washington made it a condition for lifting sanctions. And if that's the case, then this isn't just about political prisoners. It's about reshaping Venezuela's economic future and deciding who controls it. Think about the timing. Trump removes Maduro. Rubio applies pressure. Delcy announces amnesty and economic reform in the same package. That's not coincidence, that's coordination. But coordination with who? The US? Regional partners? Business interests who want access to Venezuelan oil again? Because whoever gets access to that oil controls Venezuela's rebuilding. And whoever controls the rebuilding controls the next government. Remember when I said the question isn't whether Trump won this round? Here's why that matters. If Delcy delivers real reforms, prisoner releases with full documentation, independent election observers, economic restructuring, Trump can claim a foreign policy victory without putting troops on the ground. But if she's stalling, he can escalate. More sanctions, more pressure on oil exports, more support for the opposition. And Delcy knows this. Maria Corina Machado, the opposition leader who won the presidential primary before being banned from running, has already responded. She called the amnesty announcement a result of international pressure, not goodwill. And she's demanding total release of all political prisoners, not selective freedom. That's the voice Trump is listening to, not Delcy's. And that creates a problem for Delcy. Because if the opposition says it's not enough, and Trump agrees, then her gamble failed. She gave up symbolic power, closing El Helicoide, announcing amnesty, opening the oil sector, but didn't buy herself breathing room. She just exposed herself as weak. So what happens next? There are a few markers to watch. First, does the text of the amnesty law get published with clear criteria, or does it stay vague and conditional? Because vague laws are enforcement traps. They sound good in press conferences, but in practice, they give the regime discretion to decide who's covered and who's not. Second, does CBIN actually get restructured, or do the same people just move to a different building? If the personnel don't change, the culture doesn't change. And if the culture doesn't change, nothing changes. Third, do international observers get access to verify prisoner releases and monitor the political process? Not symbolic access, real access. Independent verification. Because without that, the regime can claim anything and no one can challenge it. And here's the marker that matters most. Does Delcy set a date for elections? Because that's what Trump really wants. He doesn't care if Delcy stays in power temporarily. He cares that Venezuela moves toward a system where power is contested, not inherited. And the only way to prove that is through a credible electoral process with international oversight. If Delcy announces a timeline and sticks to it, then this could be real. If she delays, stalls, or sets conditions that make free elections impossible, then Trump's team will interpret that as confirmation. This was theater. And if it's theater, the consequences are already planned. Trump has options. He can tighten sanctions on remaining Venezuelan officials. He can freeze assets held abroad by regime-connected elites. He can increase support, financial and diplomatic, to the opposition. He can coordinate with Colombia and Brazil to isolate Venezuela regionally. And he can do all of that without putting a single US soldier on the ground. That's the leverage Rubio built. And Delcy is testing whether Trump is willing to use it. But here's what makes this moment different from past pressure campaigns against Caracas. Trump isn't operating through the State Department bureaucracy. He's not waiting for consensus from allies. He authorized the capture of a sitting head of state in a foreign country and faced almost no domestic political backlash. That tells you two things. 1. Trump believes the American public will support aggressive moves against authoritarian regimes in the hemisphere. 2. He's willing to act unilaterally if he thinks multilateral processes are too slow. That changes the calculus for someone like Delcy, because in the past, regimes could survive by waiting out US administrations. 4 years of pressure, then maybe a friendlier president, maybe sanctions relief, maybe detente. But Trump's approach doesn't leave room for that. He's creating facts on the ground, Maduro's capture, regime concessions, economic opening, that can't easily be reversed, even if the political winds shift in Washington. Delcy Rodríguez stood in front of cameras and announced what looked like a turning point. But turning points require follow-through. And in Caracas, follow-through has always been the missing piece. Trump removed the most powerful man in Venezuela in a single operation. He installed pressure that forced Maduro's successor to make moves Maduro never would have made. But removing a leader is the easy part. Changing a system, that's where the real test begins. The question now isn't whether Delcy blinked. It's whether she has the power to deliver what she promised, or whether someone else in the regime is already planning to walk it back. And if Trump thinks she's stalling, the next move won't be an announcement. It'll be an escalation. Because Trump didn't back Maduro into a corner just to let his replacement play the same game. He backed the entire system into a corner, and now we're watching to see if it collapses, or if it finds a way to survive under new rules. Either way, the pressure isn't lifting, it's just getting started.